sitting is equivalent of smoking, and these studies have shown and compared the effects of sitting around a lot versus smoking on things like your heart function and your cardiovascular health. And they established that people who have a sedentary lifestyle, who sit around, is equivalent of smoking. And so to me, sitting around is one of the worst things you could do for yourself.
Yeah. Sedentary life has so many detrimental things that it brings to us. And on the flip side, as we mentioned, exercise has so many incredible things that it brings to us. What are your recommendations when you put together your 12-week brain fitness program and you have your patients out of your clinic go through it? When you are taking somebody who is living a sedentary lifestyle, what is your prescription for them in terms of how much fitness they should be incorporating into their life? And then what are the ways that you help them accomplish that?
That's an excellent question, Drew. Because, I don't blame people who have a sedentary lifestyle. I don't think they sort of sat down and said, I choose to just sit around, do nothing. I think what happens is that as people have a lifestyle, and let's say they eat a lot, and then that eating spikes their insulin, and then they get hypoglycemic. And when they get hypoglycemic, they feel hungry, so they feel tired. So they eat more. And the kind of things they eat, unfortunately, at times sugary food, which make you tired. And then when you're tired, you really don't have energy to move around. You just sit around, whether it's at work or at home. So I find it helpful to consider this a shared problem with my patients. Like I tell my patients, we are in this together. I'm not going to blame you for being overweight or not doing things. You are where you are, and you haven't seen the joys of the other side. So we're going to make a journey to go there on the other side where you exercise and rejuvenate your brain and your body. And I think the most difficult step for people to make that switch is the first step, from doing nothing to doing something. We had brain coaches who were trained to serve as like cheerleaders for our patients, and they would have them walk 5 minutes a day. Just 5 minutes. We'll say, Smith, look, I know you're not a fan of going outside or doing things, but can you walk 5 minutes? You're here for me to help you. We have 12 weeks to help you. You obviously want to be better. You want to be sharper. So let's make a deal. 5 minutes a day, 4 days a week, and we'll see you next week. And I think when we give people a very small amount of exercise to do, they were likely to do it. If we told them exercise 3 hours a week, which I usually recommend to people, they're likely to say, I don't have time, I don't have the energy, it's not going to work, I have to get a membership to a gym, and so forth. So we help patients go from doing nothing to doing a little bit. And one of the things we found really interesting is that even 5 minutes or 10 minutes of walking makes you feel better. And we will also educate our patients. If you walk 1 mile a day on average, you cut your risk of Alzheimer's disease by 48%, 1 mile a day. And this is not a study from results from one study. Multiple studies have shown that walking, it really helps reduce risk of Alzheimer's disease, and walking helps to grow hippocampus. So when people walk 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, when they come back the following week, they're often excited. They say, oh my God, I feel so much better. You only walk 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And yet they report feeling better. And then we said, well, how about 15 minutes? And then we gradually build on it. Once they walk half an hour, then they start seeing the benefits themselves. They start feeling better. They feel more energetic. And that's, the rest is downhill. The biggest challenge is the first part.
Fantastic. So even if somebody's living a sedentary life, they should feel inspired to know that even starting with 5 minutes a day is starting to get them in the right direction. And then ultimately, let's say somebody is, pretty active, but wants to dial in a little bit more. Your ultimate recommendation of where people can shoot for to get, in the optimal category as related to the benefits of exercise and movement is that about that sort of 150 minutes a week that people often talk about. with exercise
So
research?
I make it simple for people. I say 3 hours a week. And, one of the things I find interesting is that there's a linear relationship between your fitness and the size of hippocampus. And that applies to kids, teenagers, adults, older people. They did a study where they looked at the hippocampus of 12-year-olds, kids, elementary school, 10, 12-year-olds. And they found that the more fit kids had a hippocampus that was 12% larger than the kids who were not fit.
Wow.
And the same applies to teenagers and older adults. And so you want to be fit. And I find that exercising about 3 hours a week is just about the right time, the right amount of exercise. Now, a lot of people ask me, should I do 30 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day? I think that as long as you do 3 hours a week, I'm happy. If you want to do like 2 90-minute sessions where you play tennis and you do something else, that's fine with me. Hit that 3-hour mark. Generally speaking, it's good to get at least half an hour at any one sitting. Your body metabolism changes after about 17 minutes. And so I find that half an hour is the minimum of beneficial exercise. If you do 5 to 10 minutes, it's a good way to start. It's a good way to start a new habit. But ultimately, you want to set a goal for 3 hours a week. And, you could do like 45 minutes, 4 days a week, 30 minutes, 6 days a week. And, you figure out what you like to do. I found it interesting that when people enjoyed what they did, then they didn't look at the time. They just did it. And one of the things we did to help our patients is to figure out why they liked. So if somebody like ping pong, then go play ping pong. If you like tennis, play tennis. If you don't like to go to the gym, don't go to the gym. Take a Zumba class. Do something you enjoy, and you should just enjoy the process, and exercise is a part of it. The fact that you're getting the benefits of exercise is secondary to the fact that you enjoy that activity. And that I think is very important.
Talk to us a little bit more about the hippocampus. That's been a big area of your focus. What is the role of the hippocampus, and how did you become so passionate about helping people protect the health and the size of the hippocampus?
I did my medical school at Harvard, and then I went to do my residency at Johns Hopkins. When I was a resident and later toward my senior years, I worked in the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Johns Hopkins, and we were monitoring patients over time. These people were coming there for like 20, 30 years. Every year they came and we monitored them to see how their lifestyle was affecting their brain, how diabetes affected their brain. We did cognitive testings, brain MRIs, the blood tests, and we monitored them. And I noticed that many of them who had obesity, diabetes, sleep apnea, things I knew that shrink their brain, were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And I said, wait a minute, these people have a good reason for being forgetful. Why are we labeling them as having Alzheimer's disease? It makes a big difference to say to someone, sir, you have Alzheimer's disease, or sir, you have multiple treatable vascular risk factors, and if we work together, you'll get better. It's a huge difference what happens to the patient, how they feel about themselves, and what happens to their families. And so, when I looked at their brain MRIs, many of them had smaller cortex and particularly smaller hippocampus. And I realized that hippocampus is the same part of the brain that shrinks with Alzheimer's disease. So 2 different things can shrink this part of the brain that's so critical for learning and memory. And so if there are things that we can grow it, we can literally prevent Alzheimer's disease. And that's such a huge message. And I wrote a book about that in 2002 called Memory Cure. And what's interesting is that that book's still selling. I still get royalties for them. I don't expect it because it's been 22 years now. But apparently people find that interesting and they're reading it. So over the years, after I published that, I monitored the field closely. And I published a paper in, again, Nature about all the things you could do to grow your hippocampus. And I provided the scientific evidence as to why. Like, we talk about sleep is good, and exercise is good, and diet is good. And I provided the molecular biology of why these interventions are so important. And again, I've seen in my clinical practice that when we do these things for our patients, the hippocampus grows. I have been running a small neurology practice in Northern Virginia where we had patients do our 12-week program, which involved three things: lifestyle modifications, brain training, and biofeedback. And we did testing beginning, halfway, and the end of the program. And we published the results of this 12-week program for people in their 60s and 70s who had remarkable improvements in their memory and other cognitive functions. And one of the things we measured was the MRIs. And half the patients grew their hippocampus by 3% or more. The hippocampus shrinks by about 0.5% per year after age 50. So 3% growth in the hippocampus in 3 months is equivalent to a brain that's 6 years younger. And so
Wow.
I find these things amazing. I find these things incredible. If any drug did that, it would be a blockbuster drug. Imagine a drug that would grow your hippocampus by 3%, makes your brain about 6 years younger in 3 months. How much would you pay for that? How popular would that medication be? By the way things work, a program like mine is not something that gets media attention and, people's attention because it requires work. People have to, follow a diet. They need to exercise. They need to do brain training. However, I think it's incredible that this part of the brain really determines our fate. Whether you're going to end up in a nursing home in your 80s, or whether in your 80s you're playing tennis and going to book reading clubs and you're traveling on your own, depends on how you lead your life that would impact the size of your campus. And the things required are not that hard. If you start doing this, it becomes a habit. Like, I have a habit that, I sleep certain number of hours, I exercise, and, I have a routine. I don't have to think about it anymore. I just do it. And it's not that hard. Watch what you eat. Don't stress too much. Exercise, do some meditation, explore the world. These are not, that hard. You take out your teeth, you brush your teeth, you floss your teeth, you sit there until 6 months. You do something every day as a routine. And people who do that are far less likely to lose their teeth when they get older. They have still their own teeth. I remember 40, 50 years ago, everybody had dentures because, by the time people got to the 60s, 70s, most people's teeth were not good enough and they need to get whole dentures. And that's not happening anymore because average person has learned that they need to brush their teeth twice a day, every day, and that's a part of their daily routine. And people who do the kind of things that are coming for growing the size of hippocampus, they do it routinely and it's not that hard.
You're right. It's not that hard. And you've really built an incredible program to help people do that. And you have so many fantastic testimonials of individuals from your clinic. I was wondering, first of all, those are incredible results. Is there a testimonial you want to share with our audience of a patient that came to you, maybe some of the stuff that they were either diagnosed with or some of the decline that they were facing, whether it was in their health or their mind, and how they went through your program and then kind of what was possible for them? Any patients come to mind that you might want to share?
I can think, when I see my patients, I bond with them. And so I can easily mention 100 names because, I know my patients, I remember them, and I connect with them. The one story that was really touching to me was a young lady, actually, a young woman from Chicago who had come to see me. And she just got married. And then shortly after the wedding, they had a car accident and she had a concussion. And because of the concussion, she couldn't think straight. She was sensitive to light. She was irritable. Her sleeping pattern had changed. And, the family said, oh, okay, you get better. They saw this doctor, that doctor. Every doctor recommended something different. And she was frustrated because she was not getting better. And she came with her, husband who clearly loved her, but was frustrated. By the time they came to see me, maybe 6 or 8 months had passed. And unfortunately, the guy had decided this is not working and they had to get divorced. Because as much as he loved her, she wasn't the woman he married.
So sad.
She was not interested in doing things. She had given up on things. She wasn't exercising. She was frustrated. She said, just leave me alone and just go. And I remember them so vividly, both of them. He was such a nice guy, such a nice gentleman toward her. And he was hating the fact that he was leaving someone he loved because she's not the woman he married. He was not talking. She was not talking. She was not doing things. So I said, listen, you had one concussion and you're a young person, you're a young woman. You must get better. Not getting better is not an option. I've seen thousands of patients like you. There's no reason for you not to get better. One reason you have not gotten better is that you receive care from multiple specialists who do their own things. So, for example, if you're sensitive to light and you have headaches, you see a neurologist who would prescribe medications for migraine. If you have anxiety, irritability, depression, you see a psychiatrist and they prescribe antidepressants. Now, antidepressants cause weight gain and reduce libido, which means you get fat and you're not interested in sex. And that can affect your relationship with your husband, which then affects how you lead your life. And then she had dizziness, and she had seen a vestibular therapist. Physical therapists were giving her exercises which were making her migraine worse. And she was so irritable and frustrated she couldn't sleep. So she was receiving sleeping medications on top of that. So sleeping medications, antidepressants, migraine medications, giving up on life, not working. And, her parents were keeping her in their house because things were falling apart. And to me, that was a tragedy because, as I explained to her, she had to get better. She was a healthy young woman. One concussion doesn't devastate the brain. She must get better. So I provided her with our multidisciplinary program. I made a list of all the issues she had, and I went one by one in a holistic, comprehensive program, all under my supervision, not under 4 or 5 people who do their own things, independent of the other specialists. And so one of the things we did with our brain coaches was to help her start walking. Listen, let's call her Janet. Janet, you need to walk 5 minutes a day. You can do 5 minutes. Don't tell me you can't do 5 minutes. And that's one of the things I told her. I said, I promise you, you will get better. There's no reason you will not get better. I promise you that. And she reluctantly agreed. And I helped her reduce some of her medications. Migraine medications are great, but they can cause fatigue. And if you're fatigued, you have no energy to do things. So instead of that, I told her some meditation techniques. And I told her husband to be sympathetic toward her and don't do anything, just hold off on getting divorced for now. And then she came to our program twice a week, and we did some brain training with her. We just said, listen, let's memorize 10 words. You can do 10 words. Says, I can. So, okay, 5 words. So we showed her how to memorize 5 words. She started walking 5-10 minutes. I reduced some of her medications. I usually see patients, beginning 6 weeks and they end the program, but people are complicated, have multiple issues. I see them every 2 weeks. So I saw her again, and I said, okay, well, not taking the sleeping medications have actually made you feel better because you're not as groggy. And starting to walk better, she made her feel better. And so she gradually was coming out of her shell. She started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. At times, she thought life was not worth living. But she started to realize that something is changing about her. And so when I saw her at 6 weeks, she was already getting better. And I took away some of the antidepressant medications from her because the reason she was not doing some things and she was tired all the time wasn't that she was depressed. That was the side effects of the other medications. So I took those medications off, and I felt that, the side effect of the medication is actually affecting her. Weight gain in a young woman is not good, and not having sex with your husband affects you and your relationship. So as the medications were off, I think they started being a little more lovey-dovey toward each other. And so by the time she came back at 12 weeks, she was like 50-60% better. Talk of divorce was forgotten.
Wow.
When they came, they were so lovey to each other. I never forget how they were just, mingling and touching each other. They had a very good chemistry. And so she was starting like 30-45 minutes a day. She was actually smiling. For the first time, I saw her smile. And she said herself, I know your program is 12 weeks. I'm not quite done. I want 6 more weeks. And I said, yeah, I agree with you. So she came back 6 more weeks. 6 more weeks. So she had done 18 weeks, the program. She was a new person. She was back to the person she was before the wedding. She was smiling. She got a job. lovey-dovey with husband. They were having a kid, having a baby, and her life would totally turn around. And when she came back, she had tears in her eyes. She said, you changed my life. You saved my life. This was the best thing I ever did. And that story was not once a month. That kind of story of people who came to me and saw such reversal in their life was almost once a week. If you look at the Google reviews we have Google reviews for NeuroGrow, Brain Fitness Center, the name of my practice, and we have Google reviews under my name, Dr. Fotuhi. And both of them are 5 out of 5. And there's several hundred of them. We didn't have any single patient who was unhappy or felt that this is not working for her. And that's really a testimonial to the fact that lifestyle changes and biofeedback and brain training have a huge impact. We didn't do any exotic things with them. We didn't do any, special medications with them. I find that most people don't appreciate how powerful simple lifestyle modifications are. Most people don't appreciate that diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction are powerful interventions. I think if they were expensive, more people would take them. If they had to see someone and they had to pay $1,000, they probably would find it more helpful than the fact that it's free. And I have to remind people that, these interventions are simple, readily available, but powerful. They're powerful. Taking a baby aspirin is a very powerful intervention for reducing the risk of second heart attack. Yet it's so cheap and readily available. It's probably one of the most powerful medicines there is for reducing risk of second heart attack. And it's so cheap. So you don't always need fancy, expensive things to see good results.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. These interventions are so powerful. And yet I'm sure much of what you run up against is that you are really on an awareness journey. Your goal is to raise the awareness of people who read your books, as well as your patients, that the things that they think are normal are actually not normal. This is not how we were designed to exist in the world. One of those clear examples are today, almost everybody, as you've written about in your book and you talk about in your lectures, has some type of sleep disturbance that prevents them from regularly getting a good night's sleep. It's not just once a week. It's multiple times during the week, and many people have it every single night. Can you talk about some of the top sleep disturbances that are there? All the way from the lightest things that people deal with that regularly cause sleep disturbance and prevent them from getting a good night's sleep, all the way to full-blown sleep apnea, which many people have and goes undiagnosed for years and ultimately ends up impacting their brain.
A very important point you mentioned is that a lot of people think it's acceptable. It's okay. I have some patients say, yeah, I have insomnia. Who doesn't? The second problem is that people think that if you have had sleep problems for a long time, it's not going to be fixed. It's just you, and this is the way things are. And that's a wrong assumption. So we need to challenge people with their own understanding that everybody has sleep problems, and that's okay. It's not okay. Now, the common things I see that affect people's sleep is too much anxiety. If you are stressing out about your work, if you're stressing about your relationships, you can't expect to just go sleep and that's the end of it. Your mind, the things that provoked anxiety are with you when you put your head on a pillow. And the solution for that is, yes, you have challenges. Let's write them down. You write 5 or 6 or 7 things that are on your mind, and you decide how you're going to handle them. For every problem, there's a solution. And if there's no solution for it, it's not your problem. If there's too much spending for the government, yes, that's a problem, but you go vote, and once you've done that, you've done your share. Or, you have concerns about your family members not doing what they're supposed to do. You do your part, and if they don't do their part, you've done your share. So you need to realize that, you've done your part and you're done with it. So writing down the list is helpful. And if you think that there's so many things in your mind, it helps to pour it out. Sometimes you need a therapist not to tell you what to do with your life, but to just listen. These days, everybody's busy, everybody's on their phones, and friends where just somebody who just listens to you for an hour are not as commonly available as they used to be, So number one thing I find that affects people's difficulty falling asleep, and it's the thing that wakes them about 3 o'clock in the morning, is that they have these recurrent thoughts, RNTs, repetitive negative thoughts. If you think about the same thing and you find that you're thinking about the same thing again and again and again, you need to hit the pause button. And I find it's helpful to write them down. You just make a list of the issues and what you can do about them. So you offload things from your mind onto a paper. And if you, in the middle of the night, wake up and say, shit, it's going to happen, just wake up, go to the agenda or whatever you do on your phone, whatever, and write it down so that it's done. The other thing is that when people have difficulty sleeping, that alone prevents them from falling asleep. So they say, damn it, it's 2 a.m., I'm still not sleeping. Damn it, it's 2 o'clock, I'm still not sleeping. To that I say, chill. If you're not sleeping tonight, it's not the end of the world. Don't make not sleeping worsen your insomnia. It's okay. You will not die. In the long term, it's bad for you. It's true, like any other thing. But if you don't sleep tonight, you won't. This is not the end of the world. It's okay. It's okay. Just get up and read something. I don't like the idea of going on your phones, but if it helps for you to read something and helps you fall asleep, it's okay. So that's one of the other things that I find worsens people's insomnia. The fact that they're in bed, they toss and turn, they keep looking at the phone, at the clock, 2:15, 2:45, 3:15, 4:15, 5. And they keep saying, damn it, I'm still not sleeping. If you're not sleeping, get out of bed, go sit somewhere and smile. It's okay. It's okay. Write down just the thing that bother you and then do something productive. If you have to work and, the thing that bothers you is the project that's not done at work, go sit down and do it. I think that is really helpful to offload the fact that, oh, damn it, I'm not sleeping. Tomorrow I'm going to be a mess. You probably will be, but that's okay. You will catch on. Don't worsen the process. These are the subtle things that I found very important that usually you don't hear about them when you Google what do I do to sleep better.
When it comes to identifying our risk in developing these neurodegenerative conditions, the first one was incredibly simple, and most people listening today probably have it at home, and it was a tape measure. What does a tape measure have to do with us understanding how well our body, and therefore our brain are running or not running?
Very simple. Increased body fat around the belly, around the middle, is a marker of metabolic dysfunction. It's correlated with higher markers of inflammation, increased resistance of the body's ability to use insulin, higher blood sugar, increased action of damaging free radicals. There it is, just a measurement of your belly. So, what could be more simple? And then I did describe, various other perhaps more sophisticated ways of looking at your metabolism. But that's a good place to start, and get your blood pressure checked, for example. That's pretty straightforward. If we want to take it further, then by all means, get a sense as to what is your fasting blood sugar. And if you really want to be, aggressive and get the most out of that data, then try wearing a continuous glucose monitor for a couple of weeks and get a sense not only what your blood sugar was on a particular morning, but what is it throughout the day? What is it in terms of its average? How do you respond to carbohydrates in your meal? What is the maximum blood sugar that you might experience in a day, which you're not going to know if you go to the doctor every year and have a fasting blood sugar that people actually train for. It's a much better understanding of the dynamics of sugar metabolism in your body. Nothing could be more important for your brain. In my opinion, that's probably the most important thing to consider as it relates to Alzheimer's risk. I wrote Grain Brain, and people kind of talked about the fact that, well, that's a book that talks all about gluten issues in how even in the brain, gluten sensitivity can affect the brain. Well, we did talk about gluten quite a bit, but the main issue with respect to the grains was the processed grains raising blood sugar and the relationship. Even when I wrote that book in 2012, the relationship of markers of blood sugar to the risk of developing either brain shrinkage or actual Alzheimer's or even cognitive decline. And that information was published even back then. I quoted a study from, I believe the author was named Sechi in the New England Journal of Medicine, who described a powerful relationship between average blood sugar measurement, which is called the hemoglobin A1C, and rate of brain shrinkage, a perfect correlation. Higher levels of A1C, faster rates of brain shrinkage. Couldn't be more simple than that. What was important was that these relationships began at an A1C of around 5.8, where a doctor is going to say, hey, you're doing great. You're not even pre-diabetic yet. And other studies, and also from the New England Journal of Medicine way back then, showing that having a blood sugar even 100 to 105, where you're going to get a pat on the back and be told, come back next year, associated with increased risk of developing dementia. So, we have to redefine, we have to get away from defining normal or in the normal range, which is, when you take 1,000 people, what's normal, basically what is average, to really focus on what is optimal, what's best for an individual. And I can assure you it's not having a blood sugar of 100 to 105. We now know quite clearly that's not good enough. You're not doing your job. That's a blood sugar unlike anything humans have experienced in their past, I would suspect.
Just to connect the dots even a little bit further off of what you shared, and again, I'm pulling a quote from you. If your blood glucose is high, right, you're on your way to pre-diabetes. We know that millions of people, I think the estimates are 80 million people in America are in that pre-diabetic range. Then you're well on your way at that point in time to, getting diabetes. And you share the statistic that if you have diabetes, you are 4xing your chances, quadrupling your chances of ultimately ending up with Alzheimer's. Is that accurate?
With ultimately ending up with a disease for which there is no pharmaceutical fix. You're paving the way to be stuck. And what a horrible disease. I mean, there are some innovative approaches to actually treating Alzheimer's. You're familiar with the work of Dr. Dale Bredesen, amazing pioneering work, but it's not one thing that he does. It's a multitude of what he calls holes in the roof that he plugs to keep it from raining in. But the idea that, there's a drug out there right now that's going to turn a person around, that's not reality. We're nowhere near that. Though I do have some ideas that we'll talk about later that may open the door to that type of approach.
Well, we talked about the tape measure, and by proxy, essentially an at-home ability to look at just how much excess weight is your body carrying around and storing. If you can go a step further, people can get an in-body scan or a DEXA scan. They can get a body composition of themselves. These days, there's also even a step further. You have a lot of imaging centers that are looking at also visceral fat as a byproduct of, the most dangerous type of fat inside of the, body that would also be increasing our risk of a lot of these metabolism or actually a byproduct of the fact that we have such bad and poor metabolic health. You talked about blood sugar in detail, the importance of not just relying on a fasting glucose, but potentially if you can afford it or you can convince your doctor using something like a continuous glucose monitor or trying one of these, direct to consumer solutions that are there. And that how blood sugar is largely in this elevated state for so many millions of people because they are consuming, first and foremost, a lot of ultra processed calories from both sugar and refined carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can be good. We don't want to demonize them, but we're talking about the refined excess levels of carbohydrates in the diet. What are some examples of those, just so people can connect the dots?
Well, basically, pretty much anything in a package. any carbohydrate in a package, whether they're derived from grain or other type of carbohydrate that's been modified in such a way that when we consume them, we are basically consuming sugar. So the pastas, the refined rices, the crackers, cookies, cakes, anything from flour, even if it's organic, organic flour that was made and blessed by elves, it doesn't matter. It's going to raise your blood sugar. But the point is that I'll say it's likely to raise your blood sugar. It's really valuable to know what, in terms of an individual, is going to raise his or her blood sugar. So it's a bit of a personalized approach in terms of what we should be eating. And everybody's trying to talk about, this diet being the best diet, whether it's pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, paleo, carnivore, or only eating foods that start with a vowel, whatever it may be. The point is, for me, I've come to a place in life where my response is two things or three things. I want to see a diet that's got a lot of fiber, of color, meaning lots of colorful vegetables, and a diet that keeps your blood sugar under control. If you can do those two things, I don't care. I'm fine, because you're going to get your nutrients, you're going to have fiber to nurture your microbiome, and you're going to be on a program, whatever it may be for you, that keeps your blood sugar under control. And I want to comment, you said something earlier about if you can afford it, a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. If that's an issue, a simpler thing to do, not as effective, but very informative, the next time a person goes to the doctor for that annual blood work, including the fasting blood sugar, make sure they do a fasting insulin level as well, because that's going to tell an individual where he or she is in terms of insulin functionality, insulin sensitivity, meaning that you might have a normal blood sugar, but it's only normal because your body is putting out a lot of insulin to keep that blood sugar where it needs to be. In other words, the pancreas is working overtime, and that is a bit of a harbinger for future insulin resistance, blood sugar then coming up and ultimately becoming pre-diabetic and diabetic. So it's a good test to have. Is it as effective as wearing a glucose monitor for a period of time? I don't think so. But still, it's something we could add to that list of potential studies we could get.
And one other thing that you mentioned was blood pressure. What is blood pressure? And, getting your regular blood pressure checked, where does that fall into, and why is it considered a risk factor?
Well, blood pressure really relates to blood flow. And ultimately, the higher a blood pressure is, ultimately, the less blood flow we're going to get to our organs. And that's, the real issue with why even subtle elevations of blood pressure are risky, because of the associated risk with cardiovascular disease and stroke. So we want to keep our blood pressure low so that our blood vessels remain resilient and we can continue to supply blood to areas that are needed. And it's interesting that both blood pressure and function of insulin/glucose are regulated upstream by the same chemical, which is nitric oxide. So nitric oxide, yes, plays a role. It was the original vascular endothelial factor that was involved in allowing blood vessels to expand, to improve blood supply, blood flow when needed to various organs of the body. In fact, the Nobel Prize was awarded in 1988 because of that discovery, that it was a gas, nitric oxide, in the body. Who knew a gas would have such activity? But more recently, it's been discovered that this nitric oxide gas actually plays a fundamental role in regulating how insulin works in the body. The functionality of insulin is dependent to a significant degree on the presence of nitric oxide. So that said, we lose nitric oxide as we age. Our nitric oxide levels decline in lockstep with various changes that occur in the mouth, for example, with respect to the mouth organisms, the bacteria living in the mouth, the oral microbiome, if you will. Who knew that about 50% of the nitric oxide in our bodies is a consequence of what bacteria on the top of the tongue are able to do with the food that we eat. When we eat colorful vegetables like beets that are high in nitrates, those nitrates are converted into nitrite in the bacteria by virtue of the bacteria that live on the back of the tongue, the top of the tongue. And that nitrite is the raw material from which our bodies are able to manufacture this nitric oxide then in the rest of the body. So you can imagine if we were to damage those bacteria somehow in some crazy way, that perhaps, their ability to ultimately allow us to have adequate amounts of nitric oxide might be compromised. And what might that do? Well, it might affect blood pressure, it might affect blood sugar. Well, it turns out that this was studied back in 2019. Two studies demonstrated that when people use mouthwash that is antibacterial 2 or more times a day, a 3-year study, it was demonstrated that there was about a 49% increased risk of becoming a diabetic when you used a mouthwash 2 or more times a day over a 3-year period. Risk of being diagnosed with hypertension increased close to 100%. And what are you doing? You're killing off bacteria that are there to help you and make nitric oxide available in your body to control your blood sugar, to control blood supply to your organs. So, now we've talked for an awful long time about the value and the importance of our gut microbiome. Now we're talking about the mouth microbiome and the importance of these bacteria and the fallacy of us being told to use this mouthwash because it kills 99.9% of germs. They're not germs, if germs is pejorative. They're bacteria that we have co-evolved with for tens of thousands of years that are now have had their functionality delineated such that those bacteria, when you connect the dots, are controlling our blood sugar and blood pressure. Who knew?
Who knew? So quick recommendations. If somebody's using mouthwash out there today, chuck it in the trash, give it away, donate it, whatever you want to do. You've done some episodes with some great people in this space, like Dr. Mark Berhanna, who's a great educator. Your recommendations for just solid oral health, which also, maintaining good oral health and reducing the risk of things like gingivitis, coming later on in life, also is supportive for avoiding these neurodegenerative diseases as well. Is that correct?
That's right. Well, let's first talk about Dr. Mark Berhanna. So I have had him on my podcast, and that podcast on YouTube absolutely went viral. I mean, in the first couple of weeks, there were, I think, 800,000 views because he's an amazing speaker. He's incredibly knowledgeable. And this is a very, very important and not talked about topic that we need to nurture our oral microbiomes. And he made it very clear that fluoride containing toothpaste, mouthwashes threaten the oral microbiome, and various things that we do threaten the oral microbiome. And, what should we do? We should floss, we should brush, and use I guess it's a brand name, water pick, whatever, there's got to be a name for it, a water flosser of some sort. And in fact, I have a USB rechargeable one. I don't even know the brand, and I travel with it because I use it all the time. Dr. Berhanna has developed a type of toothpaste that nurtures the oral microbiome. It's called FYGG, F-Y-G-G, which stands for your good guys. So he's trying to care and love the oral microbiome. And I think it's really very, very valuable. It's a new frontier. We hadn't considered that before, but look, 10 years ago when we talked about the gut-brain connection, people thought that I had a screw loose, and maybe I did, but, now everybody seems to be talking about the gut-brain connection and the brain-gut connection as well. It's bidirectional. But that said, it's, recognizing what you had mentioned, that poor oral health bodes poorly for the brain. Periodontal disease is clearly associated with cardiovascular disease and neurodegenerative conditions as well. When there is an overgrowth of various types of bacteria, one in particular called Porphyromonas gingivalis, it's threatening to the brain. We can detect breakdown products of that bacterium in the brain and with inflammation around it. So, we're learning an awful lot these days about what goes on in one part of the body and how it affects the brain and other parts of the body.
Yeah, I love that. Also, I'm a big fan of fig. I use it every day. My wife loves it. I have no affiliation. I just thought they did an incredible job in making a better for you toothpaste that's out
And
there.
I have no affiliation either, but shout out for Fig, FYGG, because it's a good thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. We'll link it in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out. There was one other one that you mentioned, which was brain metabolism. And of course, that is, really the big picture conversation here. How does our brain use energy? But you mentioned something that was very curious to me. You said we have tools these days to actually kind of see how good our brain is at utilizing energy. What are some of those tools, and are they available to the people that are listening today?
First tool would be simply a neurocognitive test. If they're available, multiple sites have them online and they're free. I know that Dr. Bredesen's site has it. And that's going to give you an indication. If you're not up to speed based upon age adjustment, that's an indication that your brain metabolism is off. But there is the development now of a unique type of MRI scan, no radiation, that is going to be able to measure brain metabolism, being developed by Dr. Raj Attariwala in Vancouver. He pioneered total body MRI, which I just had, about 3 weeks ago. I traveled to Vancouver to spend some time with Dr. Attariwala to discuss the total body MRI and specifically the upcoming development of brain functional imaging as it relates to brain metabolism. So I think it's going to be something that will be available to people soon. The studies that I mentioned earlier that predict difficulties with the brain 2 decades ahead of time are really research studied. They are using a radioactive tagged glucose called fluorodeoxyglucose. And these are really just designed for research application, unfortunately. But, again, it is a radioactive tracer, so it wouldn't be fully considered non-invasive. But I think the MRI scans that Dr. Attariwala is developing are going to be available probably, throughout North America. And I think it's going to be, for those of us who are involved in research in this area, going to be very, very helpful.
Something you've been posting about as long as I can remember is really helping people understand the risks of a sedentary lifestyle as being another risk factor when it comes to the brain. When your body is sedentary and you don't get exercise, you in a way have a sluggish brain. And a sluggish brain is a brain that is at a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's, dementia, other neurodegenerative diseases. Talk to us about exercise and how people can benchmark the level of exercise they're getting, or in some cases not getting at any age, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 and beyond, as a measure of what their likelihood is of developing a brain disease.
Well, it's been said that sitting is the new smoking. And, with all the things that we do, pretty much you could be sitting all day. And, the relationships between this sedentarity and risk of neurodegenerative conditions, I think, is really quite profound. But it's also cardiovascular issues, diabetes, obesity, it's hypertension. We have a very cush life now. We don't have to do anything. We have to, make ourselves get up and do things, unless you really find something that you really, really like, and it's an impetus to stay active. For me, lately, it's been pickleball. Cats meow. Love the sport. Anyway, so one study published last year in the Journal of the American Medical Association looked at individuals over a long period of time and had them 8-year period of time, had them wear what's called a wrist accelerometer that measured their walking. And that's just one form of activity. And it strongly correlated increased number of steps per day with decreased risk of cognitive decline. Perfect correlation. They found that the ideal sweet spot was somewhere around 9,800 steps per day. So just around the so-called 10,000 steps per day. Another study that was published in the journal BMJ in January of 2023 was a 10-year study looking at, I believe, 80,000 individuals. And it looked at a variety of lifestyle metrics, including physical activity, socialization, in other words, interacting with other people, challenging oneself cognitively, cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption, and nutrition, as all variables over which we have control. And what was really fascinating about the results was that you know where this is going. Those who had the most healthy lifestyle based upon the various parameters I just mentioned had a dramatically lower risk for cognitive decline. But here's the take-home message that I think is so profound, is that it included even, they teased apart those individuals who carried the APOE4 allele, in other words, the so-called Alzheimer's risk gene. The same results were seen in those individuals who heretofore were condemned to thinking that they were going to get Alzheimer's because they carried APOE4, which about 23% of Americans actually carried. It's a allele, it's a variable type of gene, if you will. You can have APO2, APO3, APO4, and you have 2 shots at it. So having 1 4 or 2 4s, we've always said, oh, that's a dramatic increased risk of Alzheimer's. This study showed that, guess what? If you maintain a healthy lifestyle, that despite carrying the APOE4 allele, healthy lifestyle offsets that risk and allows you to be in the group that's protected moving forward. So this information is absolutely profound, in my opinion, that here is this incredibly threatening disease affecting 55 million people worldwide, for which risk can be offloaded by simply making good choices today while you're cognitively intact. Again, fixing the roof while the sun is shining.
On that note, Dr. Perlmutter, why do you think, you've been doing this thing for a little while, even though you look super young. Why do you think that message still, with all the information that's out there, with so many people like yourself, especially championing this, why has that message not penetrated the zeitgeist to the degree that people who are so afraid of developing dementia in the future, Alzheimer's, any of these neurodegenerative diseases, they are not forming groups and societies where they're like, hey, let's regularly play pickleball for our brain health. Let's actually start making home cooked meals together in a group and be accountable to each other. Why is that not penetrated minus a small percentage of the population?
It's a great question. And here's a bit of cynicism. And that is that, what people generally pay attention to is what's fed to them and through media. And, all you have to do, if you want to answer your question, is watch the evening news tonight, or any night for that matter. And all you see are advertisements for this drug or that drug. And when the Alzheimer's drugs were first approved, that'd be another thing to talk about. Our medical journals were saturated with ads. In fact, I read another neurology journal last night, and on page 2 was an ad for one of these beta amyloid drugs, despite what I've just told you. So I think people are really receiving the message that our wonderful modern breakthroughs in science are here to fix all your ills. Enjoy the party. And it's just not that way. And I think people want to believe that they can get away with it all. And look at the soaring rates of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. Those metrics are clear indicators that there's a storm on the horizon as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. And, the threat that isn't considered as it relates to Alzheimer's disease is that we're going to lose cognitive reserve as a society. We're losing all the smarts of elderly people, and frankly, not such elderly people. And that's worrisome, because there's great wisdom to be passed on from generation to generation. But having said that, again, the messaging is that there's going to be something developed very, very soon. Go ahead and continue to do what you want. Behave from the level of the amygdala. Eat what you want, act like you want, stay up late, watch TV, party like it's, there's no tomorrow. And there may not be if you continue to, make those lifestyle choices. It would be great. I would welcome a cure for this horrendous disease. It's been estimated by 2050 we'll have twice as many Alzheimer's patients in America. That's a horrendous increase. And the cost of just caring for these individuals right now is about $350 billion with a B a year just in our country alone. By 2050, that number is expected to be more than $1 trillion caring for Alzheimer's disease, a disease which is pretty much preventable if this message were to get out. So there's a week in May every year that is Alzheimer's Awareness Week. And we're all aware of Alzheimer's. What's the point to be aware of this so that we can have walks to raise money for development of drugs, or who knows where that money goes? So a bunch of us got together, people that you know, Rhonda Patrick, Dale Bredesen, Sarah Gottfried, myself, Jim Quick. A lot of people got together and said, we got to do better. So we've created on May the 15th, 2024. I know this is evergreen, sorry. Alzheimer's Prevention Day. And we're going to launch that globally. And this is going to be a web presence that gives people all of this information, interviews with thought leaders to give out this information like we're sharing right now, a robust resource as it relates to searchable publications that can confirm what we're talking about and give you chapter and verse how to do it, how to exercise, what kind of diet is best, how to measure blood sugar. All of these metrics will be made available to people to be really facilitated in terms of making important changes to protect your brain. We are the architects of our brain's destiny, not pharmaceutical companies. And that's the message that I think is so important. And I think gets to the heart of why you just asked me that question, because I think by and large, people and medical doctors think otherwise. There was an interesting report that appeared in Consumer Reports in the late 1980s by a Dr. Jerry Avorn from Harvard, who did a study asking doctors, where do you get the most information when you read a medical journal? And most of the information, more than 70%, came from the ads. So ads direct to medical doctors are very, very powerful and help dictate how they practice medicine. And truthfully, it is a lot easier and quicker to write a prescription than it is to talk to an individual about the various lifestyle choices that she or he should be making in order to safeguard their brains moving forward.
I believe that lifestyle plays a crucial role in brain health overall, and you and I have talked about this before. And I think this is especially true when it comes to menopause as well as puberty and pregnancy. It really, the way you live your life and the choices you make have a huge impact on your health, not just your physical health, but your cognitive health and mental health as well. And one reason for it that I like to discuss is that the brain is not like the other organs in the body. So most of our organs, the cells in most of our organs regenerate continuously. There's a very rapid turnover. So if you look at your blood cells, they're constantly discarded and regenerated every 3 months, right? If you look at your hair, you lose hair very often, but then it regrows. Even the skeleton is renewed at a rate of 10% a year. So when whatever change you make in your lifestyle, whether it's diet, exercise, stress reduction, you can see the effects very quickly because your body is optimized for change, not your brain. Your brain is optimized for stability. So our neurons do not regenerate. Some can grow over time, but most of the neurons we have are born with us and stay with us for life. So the best way to have a positive impact on your brain health is to be consistent, right? This is why quick fixes do not work from brain health. These 3 weeks magic plans that people try to sell, not happening when it comes to brain health. Because if you could change your brain in a matter of day, we would all be mad, right? We need to protect
it's good that your brain is stable. And
It's
not
good that
so
your brain
easily
is stable.
influenced.
But the changes then are long lasting. So lifestyle practices that are done consistently, frequently enough, for a long enough period of time have the best chances of making a positive or negative impact on brain health. And some things work better than others. So for menopause, the number one most important thing that nobody should do is smoking. Smoking is the number one ovarian toxin that you can yourself introduce inside your body. And it's not just active smoking, it's passive smoking as well. And it starts young. It accumulates, right? The way that these neuroendocrine toxins work is by bioaccumulation. So it's not a once in a while thing. Once you are exposed, the effects are long lasting and they tend to accumulate in ovarian tissue, breast tissue, fat tissue, brain tissue, and stay there for a long time. So this is something that we really should address because there are a lot of households where kids grow up and parents smoke or somebody else smokes. So it's really important to open the windows and make sure maybe there's an air purifier in the house because it starts really, really young. And the changes that if you're exposed to cigarette smoke, tobacco smoke at a young age, this can actually have an impact on your reproductive life for life. And also your menopause. So that's the number one thing that I would say, just be careful. And air purifiers everywhere.
Or just don't smoke or
Or
don't
don't
be
smoke,
around it.
yes. And also make sure that people realize that there's an impact.
Yeah, it seems like smoking is on the decline in America, but then you go,
Yes.
but vaping is up,
Vaping
and that
is
has its
up.
own
Yes.
issues.
Anything chemical.
But
that-
Europe, you know,
Oh.
I know you're from Italy. Like
Yes.
I go to Italy, I go to visit Europe, and it still feels like a lot of people
Asia.
smoke there.
Yes.
Asia,
Yes.
yep,
Yes, lots of people still smoke.
yeah.
Lots
They
of
haven't gotten the
women still
memo.
smoke.
We need to translate this
Yes.
interview in all the
In
different
other languages, yes. But also, there are a lot of people who maybe tried smoking at some point in life, like in high school and whatnot. And it's important to know if you've ever smoked, if you smoked more than 100 cigarettes in your entire life, that is enough to have a negative impact on the way that you're going to go through menopause as a woman, and therefore on the way that your brain is going to start aging, starting in midlife. So in that case, in my opinion, it's really important to consider antioxidants, either through the diet or as supplements, because that can offset the kind of damage that you're going to carry with you for a long time. I used to smoke in high school, as every Italian person. Not every Italian person, but the vast majority of kids back then, and I regret it to this day.
Yeah. Well, it's good that
thinking.
It's good that you're passing on the message, and it's good to know
Yes.
that even if somebody's listening today and it's like, oh my gosh, I was that person. I've smoked at least 100 cigarettes.
Yes, which is not. It's 5 packs.
Yeah.
Right.
In your total
In your
life.
entire life.
It's good that you've also mentioned that there's things that can be done.
To offset.
Antioxidants,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly antioxidant, like vitamin C high doses.
glutathione,
Regular.
right? The master
Yes,
antioxidant, right?
yes.
People
All
can
the
take it in supplement form,
antioxidants, beta
and then
carotene.
diet.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. So that's one thing. So then exercise.
Yep.
It's a wonderful way to reduce the number and severity of menopausal symptoms. And I think by looking at the entire research so far, there are 3 types of exercise that can really help with different things. So aerobic exercise is usually the go-to. If you want more bang for your buck, then you go for aerobic exercise. Aerobic. Yes.
You're saying
jumping, running.
That's the biggest bang for the buck.
Yes.
Even more than strength training.
It is considered to be the most effective type of activity because
For menopause, or you're saying for the brain?
for both at this point, at least in the scientific community, I don't know.
I've heard a
in
few
the
debates.
wellness community.
I've heard a few debates in the scientific community of, in particular, because there's such a shift in how our metabolic health changes
Yes.
as we age, which is one of the number one complaints that women have, which I want to
Yes.
ask you about, is
Yes.
that they start to notice fat deposits and body composition completely differently
Yes.
than how it was before. And I'm very curious about that. I know the women that
Yes.
are listening on the podcast are curious. But because such a big part of metabolism is maintaining lean muscle mass,
Yeah.
which has its own benefits. Not that there's not benefits for aerobic, that women in particular, they tend to lose muscle
Yes.
more so as they age. Sarcopenia becomes an issue. They no longer have the ability for the glucose sink that is muscle. And generally there's this correlation with lean muscle mass and brain size as we age, is what I've heard. I don't know if there's anything to that if we maintain our muscle mass, there's less brain shrinkage. Is there any truth to that? You could say no if you haven't seen.
There's some research. I think, when you say, is there some truth? Sure. The question is it universally so? Is it replicable? How much research has been done? So when I say aerobic exercise is probably the best researched type of exercise for brain health, what I mean is that there's been a lot of research done, including some clinical trials, and most studies do report positive effects. So there is a consistent positive effect. I would say that the effects of strength training on brain health have not been as widely researched. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I would say that it doesn't have to be a war. It's not one or the other, right?
Of course.
So why not doing both? And
totally.
Like you said, absolutely. So I was going to say, actually, the three types of exercise that seem to be really helpful for women's brain health and menopause are aerobic exercise, strength training, and flexibility exercises. And they target different things.
Flexibility means like stretching?
Yoga,
Yep.
Pilates, Tai Chi, mind-body exercises, plus stretching and balance overall. Those are all really important, but they seem to be more effective for different things. So aerobic exercise is usually regarded as being very helpful for brain fog.
For brain fog?
Yes, and the memory lapses and the forgetfulness and just the energy and mental fatigue that many women experience.
And why do you think that is? What's going on with aerobic exercises that it would counteract that? Is it just simply come down to blood flow in the brain?
Well, that is one component, but the point is that your brain is wired to respond to vigorous, but also moderate intensity aerobic exercise in ways that are oxygen dependent. So yes, there is an increase in blood flow that provides more nutrients and more readily available oxygen to your brain cells, which is very important. And at the same time, there are a few different things that are activated in the brain, also via estrogen-dependent pathways. So there are chemicals that are being released when we perform that kind of oxygen-inducing exercise that are also beneficial on the way that estrogen binds to estrogen receptors in the brain. So you get help from two different pathways in a way. And it also, it reduces inflammation, it boosts immunity. So it has a lot of good positive effects fairly quickly, I would say. Maybe that's what scientists mean when they say if you really need a little boost, go for a run, because the effects can be fast. So why not, right? Also, what exercise does is that it supports thermoregulation throughout the body. So it helps stabilize body temperature. That has been shown to help minimize hot flashes and night sweats, which are usually one of the biggest concerns for women going through menopause. So that, so let's say if your major concern is the hot flashes and the night sweats, which by the way happen also when you're pregnant, just for context, it's not just menopause. It happens as women just go through life. Then activities that increase your heart rate seem to really be helpful. And it could be strength training as long as your heart is beating a little bit faster and there is a little bit flush into the cheeks, right? And you can talk as you go, but you would be challenged to maybe sing a song. That is the kind of range that seems to be working well at least for women's brain health in midlife. Then the strength training, which is helpful for metabolism throughout the body and improving insulin sensitivity and all these beautiful things that strength training can do for your muscles, but also it's been linked with better mood. So I think that is important to know, that for women who are having trouble with depressive symptoms or anxiety or irritability, some women get really, really angry. They feel like an increase in rage and hostility during menopause. And some women have very severe depression as well. So it's good to know that if you incorporate strength training in your workout, that may not only help your muscles and your metabolic activity, but also your mood. So I think that's one more reason to look into that as one type of exercise that is beneficial also to brain health. And then flexibility and balance, like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, martial arts, if you want to try, or any kind of mind-body techniques are good, not just for balance and flexibility, but also for sleep and stress reduction. So I think, you have choices, and then it's always a matter of making time and finding the kind of exercise that you really enjoy and that is sustainable for you to do. But that could be really helpful for menopause as well.
So would the opposite statement be true? Could you universally say that, hey, having a sedentary life is one of the worst things you could do to navigate this period of time of perimenopause into menopause, and that it would exacerbate the symptoms?
Yeah, it can make them
most likely.
worse. Yes, for sure. Also, one thing we haven't talked about is what is menopause? Yeah, most people don't know. I find it really interesting when our patients come to us for their brain scans and neurological evaluations, and we're like, so are you in menopause? A lot of people are like, I have no idea. I can't quite tell.
Okay,
what
let's see if I have it right from my understanding.
Go.
It's the time period between your last period, and it has to be a year since your last period.
Yes.
And that is the classical definition. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's accurate. Okay. So what is confusing about this definition is that it sort of implies that menopause is one day on the calendar.
Right.
And it doesn't take into account that is the end of menopause. What menopause actually is a transition, is a process, is a complex and dynamic process that can take years, up to decades.
Yeah, decades.
So a lot of people are thrown out. A lot of women feel a little bit maybe blindsided by their bodies and let down by their brains, and especially failed by their doctors who don't often always recognize the symptoms until you reach that milestone. When you're like, okay, I haven't had my period in 12 months or longer. They're like, oh, you're in menopause. Yay, now I know what to do with you. But the 10 years prior are usually kind of dismissed as, it's midlife, maybe you're under stress, maybe you should see a psychotherapist, do you want some antidepressants? So it's important to clarify that there's a lot, it's a long time. It takes a long time to go through. It can take a while to go through menopause. And all these things we're talking about are important to do before that time point, also after menopause, but also in the years leading up to menopause, because that's really when most people have a hard time, when the symptoms are most severe. So when you look at your wife or any woman's reproductive life, from puberty through usually your 40s, once you have a regular menstrual cycle, that is your reproductive life or your premenopausal life. Then it will happen at some point. I don't know how much in detail you want me to go. Stop me if it's too much.
Go into detail.
Okay.
There's never too much.
So at some point, your cycle will start changing slightly. It may become shorter or longer or heavier or lighter. That is the late premenopausal stage where many women start having trouble sleeping. This is something that happens. So I think it's important to talk about so that we're all prepared. There will be nights when you just can't sleep. No matter what you do, you just look at the ceiling and wonder what is happening. Did I drink too much coffee? Do I have too much on my mind? It may be progesterone. It's not universally the case, but it may happen. So this is something good to know. Then you start missing your period. But it may just be like, okay, this month I didn't have my period, but then I have it again. And then I have it for 6 months and then I skip it again. Right? That is the early perimenopausal phase. And it's important to notice this because it's usually a sign that you will start going through the actual transition within 4 to 5 years, sometimes sooner than that. So it's a little bit of a red flag, like, okay, now if I can, I really want to prepare. Because the late perimenopausal stage is really the killer for many, many women. It's when the symptoms hit hardest, is when most women have a legit hard time. Then your last menstrual period arrives. Then usually in the next 1 to 6 years, the symptoms start to go away, and that is the early postmenopausal phase. And then is the late postmenopausal phase in the rest of your life. So lifestyle interventions are important always, but especially during the transition. So the early and late perimenopausal and early postmenopausal phase, which can take 10 years for some women.
Right. So for some women, they could be like their mid-30s, their late 30s, early 40s. So how you live your life then sets the tone for what's going to be.
Yes. And you know what? Your health in midlife is the best predictor as a woman of your health in old age and for the rest of your life.
And how would you define health? If you would run through like a checklist, right? If somebody was saying, how is your health in midlife? What would be some of the things that you'd be looking at?
Oh, we'd be looking at things like risk for cardiovascular disease and diabetes and metabolic damage and risk for dementia. So you want to avoid all chronic diseases, I would say, and that is
so whether or not you have a chronic disease,
yes.
whether or not you're pre-diabetic
yes.
or diabetic,
yes,
whether or not you
hyperlipidemia, right, high fat levels in blood,
body
high
composition,
cholesterol levels,
high fat,
body composition, but also in general how you feel in your own skin. Right? Like the French say, tu bien dans ta peau. And also whether or not you feel like you have enough cognitive power to really go through your days with ease. And I think this is a very good target, right? Because, health is wealth, but brain health is the ultimate treasure, I would say. And we all want our cognitive span to match our lifespan. So these are things that are very important to do as soon as you can start. It's never too late to begin, but obviously the sooner you start taking charge of your health, the better the results that you will see throughout your life. So it's diet, it's exercise, sleep hygiene, stress reduction, avoiding toxins, social networking, intellectual stimulation, regular medical checkups. There are so many things that we can do. And sometimes, sometimes medications can be helpful too.
The assumption that medical care should begin in the clinician's office is nonsense. It makes no sense. Why would we assume that if all we're doing is disease mitigation once a person gets to the office, that's a strategy? All it does is wait till the moment things go wrong and then try to slow the rate of decline. It's very impractical. So for many conditions, including depression, that's the standard of care. It's you do whatever you want in the world, and then when things go wrong, let's make sure you have access to...
When it's finally bad enough.
Exactly.
When your body's giving you the eviction notice, that's when you know.
When on most days, it's really noticeable. It's like a wound that gets infected, and at some point you say, you know what? This is really a problem. It's painful enough. I need to go get it looked at. That's kind of the way we've operated as it relates to when you should seek or even consider healthcare. But you talked about this connection that you have with your friends. And I do think one of the big insights I've gained from the last decade or so is having somebody who can hold space and listen is hugely important for mental health. It was actually done in a Mendelian randomization, which is a complicated way of doing research. They looked at what predicts people's risk for depression, and having people available to confide in, to listen to what was going on in our lives was one of the strongest predictors of lower rates for depression. And I think that's something that we're missing. We've gone to all these low touch interactions. Somebody commented on my Instagram post, or, I bumped into somebody on the sidewalk. We said hi for a moment. That's very different from holding space for somebody, listening to what's going on in their life without judgment. And I do think it is rare in circles of friends, especially in male circles of friends, to have the vulnerability to say, I'm going to tell you actually what's on my mind. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and being upset about my sports team's loss. I'm going to tell you about what's actually problematic for me, and the other person not trying to solve it. I think there is this may not be a PC thing to say, but I think there is a male tendency to solve problems. I see this in myself. Somebody tells me about what's wrong in their life. I say, here are some things that I'm thinking about as far as solutions. And I have learned repeatedly that's not what people are looking for. They just want somebody to be there, present for them, to share in that experience with them. So to tie this back together with what we're saying about when healthcare begins, when mental health care begins, just like with diseases of metabolism, what we have to address is what's happening not in the clinician's office, but what's happening in the outside world. If the outside world is toxic, we're never going to solve the problem by bringing people into a sterile environment and trying to pull out those toxins. We're not getting to any of the real issues. And so I do think that we all need to be empowered to make changes to promote our mental health, and allowing your medical provider to be the only person responsible for you being healthy makes no sense. It's not something that is within their skill set. It's not something that's even possible. And so we talk about the drains on the healthcare system. I mean, prevention model is where we have to go. But again, for mental health, the idea of preventive care is almost not a conversation. We've started to talk about it with heart disease, right? People say, oh, eat a heart smart diet to prevent heart disease. People say, take a daily aspirin to prevent heart disease, which, by the way, is basically an immunomodulating drug. Super interesting that about a fifth of American adults take an immunomodulator each day. Whether or not that makes sense for primary prevention for heart disease is another conversation. But the point being, prevention for mental health, I think, is first and foremost as it relates to our health priorities for the planet. Overall, good brain health is the single biggest variable that will determine whether we as a species survive. So what are the actual existential threats? Take asteroids off the table for a moment. It's nuclear holocaust, right? It is global warming. It's war. These are the things that
population decline. That's one that's getting more attention.
Infertility
these days.
might be an interesting one. But the point being, these are reflections of our brain state. And so if you're looking at how to maximize quality of life for the planet, I think it's brain-focused interventions first. And I think it's mental health-focused interventions first. And that has to happen outside of the clinician's office, which has been historically not the place where we talk about those things because it's so sensitive. And also it's something that, as you said, people don't want to take responsibility for their mental health issues. That is another conversation. I don't think blame is in any way a helpful conversation about what's going on with mental health, but biology is. And if we introduce biology into that equation and say, it's your diet, it's neuroinflammation, it's your hormones, it's neuroplasticity, and to some extent, it's neurotransmitters, and those are things you can influence, you give people more opportunities to positively impact their mental health without having to turf all of that to a practitioner that's just going to come in with a sledgehammer and say, look, it's this drug or psychotherapy, and that's what we've got. So it does diversify our shots on goal for an overall life of better mental health, to offload some of that responsibility to the individual years before any sort of a diagnosis, but I think in addition to things that we can do during that actual diagnosis.
Working out, dialing in diet. In fact, you probably put diet as number one because it's something that we interact with on a daily basis. It's something that so quickly can easily throw our mental health off. And it can also start to take our mental health in the right direction from everything that we know about inflammation. Is that accurate? Would you add anything to that?
So I've said this before. I think the quickest way to improve your brain state is sleep. However, taking that off the table for 1 second, I think that diet can be really challenging to dial in right. For many people, it's going to take a while. And I think as far as speed of action, the quickest thing a person could do to dial in their mental state is actually paying attention to their neurologic inputs as it relates to their sensory data, eyes and ears. Because
what news are you watching? What are you paying attention to? Are you surrounded by negativity?
That's it. We are on our screens about 12
and
hours a day.
how's all that stuff stressing you out?
That's it. I mean, we can see in real time that if a person watches news, they become stressed. And what we don't see, but is really, I think, incredibly valuable to understand, is what happens to your brain when you're stressed by the news lasts for a long time afterwards. There's a kind of a well-documented effect of what stress does to the brain. It creates tunnel vision. It creates a singular portal where you're looking at only what's right in front of you at the exclusion of everything else. And that's a very practical strategy if you have a danger in front of you. But if you're being constantly stressed, you're not able to engage with the rest of your environment. So now all of a sudden, you're not able to think about what I should eat for my dinner tonight. You're just going to eat whatever's closest. Now all of a sudden, you're not thinking about I should call my mom because her birthday is coming up. you're only focused on what's right in front of you. And that's usually the screen and whatever that screen is putting into your brain. So I think as you look at the most rapid ways to modify your brain state, it's paying attention to the inputs that come in through your eyes and through your ears and being conscious of the fact that for the most part, those are consciously defined or crafted by institutions, groups whose goal is not your brain health, whose goal is basically keeping your eyes on the screen through sensationalism and fear and stress. And if you can shut that off even for a little bit, that is a massive opportunity to reclaim some of that mental real estate.
Amazing. Right up there, I'll toss in one other one that's become a favorite of mine. And it's one of those that's often underrated. And I would say that's walking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, there's a whole list of in the toolboxes. I was just talking about one of my favorites. I would definitely put sleep, just like you. Sleep is huge. So many people have terrible sleep. Diet for sure. And I think especially for a lot of people who have a very sedentary lifestyle, just this general feeling of feeling stuck in their life, which that building up over years and years and years can be some of the root factors that ultimately can play a role in, you know, clinical depression, other things. You know, even if you're not clinically depressed, there's plenty of people that have not been diagnosed and just feel a general sense of, call it the blues, or a deep sense of, you know, melancholy. And there's something about just getting up and going for a walk, especially if you can go with another human being that you love and appreciate and other stuff. And if anybody's familiar with like the work of Francine Shapiro and EMDR and everything like that, the idea of like your eyes scanning the horizon and that letting your nervous system know that, look, no matter how bad today was, no matter what your boss said to you, no matter what fight you got into or whatever you're stressed out, you're letting your brain know by walking. And this is what she documented through her work. You're letting your brain know that you're making progress. Like you're making progress and it's all okay. Like you're gonna figure it out no matter how bad things are. And walking is one of those underrated things, you know, just going for a little bit of a walk in nature or a long walk in nature. It's just one of those things that immediately puts me in a good mood.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm an advocate of dog ownership. I mean, there's a lot. I love my dog for so many reasons, but he will let you know it's time to go out, not just so he can go to the bathroom, but to walk. It's time to move your body. And humans are so good at suppressing these natural urges that are essential for our well-being. He will tell you, he will come up to you and he will whine and say, it is the hour. He'll go over, stand by his leash. It is the hour. And that's the type of stuff we just forget, right? There's these natural patterns, whether it's circadian rhythms, the sunlight that we get into our eyes. He goes first thing in the morning, he'll lay in the sun. He loves that. And there's so much to learn from that. The other kind of correlate to that is the nature component. And so I know we've spoken about this a bit before, but I believe that our kind of removal from or divorcing from nature is a fundamental aspect of what is driving poor mental health. If you look at what we've replaced our nature exposure with, it's scrolling on social media. It's watching stressful news. Like I said before, 12 hours of a day for American adults are now spent on screens. That's basically every waking hour interacting with one form of screen or another. So first of all, those screens are putting in a whole bunch of stressful and otherwise not super healthy data. And second of all, we've removed the healthy and kind of judgment-free zone, which is the natural world. And I think just, you know, the research has been stunning as far as nature helps lower stress, but also nature helps improve our decision-making, and it doesn't take a lot. I'm always in favor of the zero-cost interventions. And this isn't a supplement. This isn't a pharmaceutical. This isn't a program. This is basically just getting outside as opposed to being inside. And so to your point about nature or about walking, I would say walking is amazing. Urban walking is awesome. But if you can move your body in a natural setting, you're getting the dual benefits of the exercise, the moving of the muscles, all the benefits that confers. But then also there's something about nature exposure that helps calm the mind. Something about the inputs coming through your senses, coming through your lungs, that has a very positive effect on our brain state and mental health. So I think that's just putting that in the menu of things a person could do. Consider in a given day, giving yourself a 15, 20-minute dose of vitamin N, and that is a positive, again, free intervention that has been clinically shown to have benefits for our brain health.
Well, Austin, some of my favorite interviews are the ones where just like you're reminded about the power. We all know the low-hanging fruit that's there, but it's like you sometimes need to just hear a conversation where you get, it's like your hype person to reinvest in those basic things. I can imagine longtime listeners of this podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of the things that people knew.
Mm-hmm.
And there might have been something that they forgot about. And it's like, did we get you excited about it? Did we get you excited again to take a walk or to text your friend that you haven't seen in a little while and catch up with them and really hear them or have them hear you about some of the tough things that they're, working through? Anything else that you want to mention to our audience before we go into just highlighting some of the projects that you're involved with right now? I always like to give love to the things that our guests are up to.
Yeah, I think, so this maybe jumps ahead to those questions, but for whatever it's worth, I started off in internal medicine, so managing chronic diseases, and then I've done a lot of things since then. But as far as a central and fundamental finding to all the, I don't know how many papers I've read at this point and all the things I've written, is just that empowering yourself to put your brain health first it's essential. It is the thing that we need to do. And in the modern day, unless you do that, your brain's function, your brain structure will be written by the prevailing winds, the foods, the influences, and that's not a good thing. So just coming back to kind of tie this together as it relates to what we've talked about with serotonin, with diet, with inflammation, with gut health, these are all variables that we can take upon ourselves to optimize. But I would say more important than trying to dial in everything and becoming the quintessential biohacker is just having the understanding that you can be in control of your health destiny, your brain destiny, with simple steps. But it necessitates becoming a little bit of a rebel as it relates to the default way of operating. And that's really key. If you're doing things that are going to be the most healthy for you, you will be judged as weird. You will be seen as somehow deviating from the norm and unsafe. And that should be your expectation. If you're eating foods that are good for you, people will say, what's wrong with you? If you are prioritizing sleep rather than going out with friends to drink, people will say you're antisocial. And I would just say, having gone through that myself, I don't know if you can relate to any of this, that should be the expectation, that this isn't necessarily going to be a walk in the park, even though a walk in the park should be part of your plan, because we are we're an unhealthy population. So doing what is necessary to preserve your own health, to preserve your own brain health, is going to feel at least initially awkward. It's going to feel at least initially like something that is weird. And that's the way it's supposed to feel.
It's a great reminder. And it's a reminder for those people who feel like they don't yet have that friend group or family group that is supportive of them. And I think that that adversity also is good in a way because it pushes you to be serious.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want somebody to experience it forever, but it kind of forces you to be strong in why you want to do these things. And what is your why? What is your purpose? What is your reasoning? Mm-hmm. Which is going to differ for every person. Let's go back to projects. Tell us about some of the things that you're involved in. Anything that you want to give a shout out to?
For sure. So I'm lucky to be involved in several projects right now. One of the ones I'm most excited about, which I alluded to earlier, is we're doing a clinical study where we're looking at how polyphenols influence epigenetic expression related to immune cells. That is a mouthful and a half, and we don't have to go into all the details of what this means, but listeners may know through some of your other people you've had on the show and through some of your conversations that one of the biggest areas of interest in medicine right now is the appreciation that our genes are not our destiny, because the writing on top of those genes, which determines how they're used, which is the science of epigenetics, may be a principal determinant of our health. So this is, there used to be a way of looking at it, either nature or nurture, and talking about our genes were kind of what we were given from our parents, and then you might have some life experiences, but those are the two big variables. And what we now know is that our life experiences are influencing our gene expression. So really, really interesting. This may actually be a central pathway by which lifestyle interventions can reprogram our health. As it relates to what changes gene expression, we're understanding that there are specific molecules in our food, one of those groups being polyphenols, which are these plant-based anti-stress molecules that may program our epigenome, our epigenetics, for a more healthy state. And here's the extra wrinkle on top, through the immune system. The very fascinating correlate here is that as we age, our immune systems age too. They become more inflamed. They become more what's called senescent. So they become more dysfunctional. This is zombie cells. And we may be able to reprogram our immune health through this science of epigenetics. So this is a complicated study, but what we're looking at here is whether an intervention of polyphenols, these plant nutrients like rutin, quercetin, luteolin, can help to modify a person's epigenome, can help to modify their biological age, can help to modify their immune cells and signals. So we're finishing up the study right now, but I'm super excited to see how this works because it's one of the first studies that's ever asked this question about how do plant nutrients actually influence health beyond, sure, they're antioxidants and, sure, they might lower inflammation, but do they influence our gene expression? So that's one project.
And how is that measured? How are you measuring that aspect? Is it some of the
It's
like DNA methylation test?
That's exactly what it is. So when you look at how you measure epigenetics, usually what you're looking at are methyl groups, which are short carbon groups that are attached to our DNA, basically. And so depending on whether those carbons are present or not present, it changes the way that DNA is used. And the analysis we're looking at is going to look at more or less about 1.6 million sites per person. So about 850,000 on the front end, 850,000 on the back end. We use sophisticated AI to kind of parse out whether there has been a statistically significant change at the pre and post periods of this study. But the bigger question, which I think is the important piece, is to say, we know that people who eat certain types of diets, who eat certain types of plants, tend to have better health outcomes, but we don't know exactly why that is. And we've kind of gone towards, it's more vitamins and minerals, or it's more antioxidants. And that's nice, but what is more important, I think, for us to understand to move this field of nutritional biochemistry from something that is, at the end of the day, just recommending people eat healthy foods because they tend to do better, to something where we're talking about targeted, personalized interventions for your health, is to understand what molecules might be influencing which pathways in our bodies. And so this epigenetic expression is a great example of how we can make that link.
Beautiful. I love it. And if people want to follow along when you guys ultimately publish and keep in touch with that,
Yeah, and so this is work that's being done through a company, Big Bold Health, the director there of science and clinical innovation. So I'm running this study and some other projects. If you check out Big Bold Health's website, you can learn all about kind of what we're up to on the whole. We'll definitely do a press release and everything else once we actually know what the study shows. And so I don't have a ton of resources just yet, but by the time you're listening to this podcast, it may be available. But generally speaking, bigboldhealth.com is where you're going to find updates on our science projects that we're doing. We're doing several other projects as well. So we're putting together a summit. We're putting together a bunch of educational content. And the take-home message with this, the projects I've been involved with Big Bold Health for the last few years, is that we're really getting immune health quite wrong. We've talked about this before. We're all fixated on the idea of microbe defense, but immunity is a principal determinant of our brain state. We've talked about that today. Immunity is going to be a major determinant of how long we live and the quality of those years. So this is getting to inflammaging, immunosenescence, zombie cells, and maybe most importantly, that there are now pathways by which we can help reprogram our immune system towards a state of overall better health. So that's immunorejuvenation, and that's really the science that we're playing with right now. I do think that we will have some pretty interesting findings in the coming months. At the end of the day, the goal is really just to understand how are there more strategies that we can use to rejuvenate a person's health. And it seems like the immune system is a big pathway within that. So we're just trying to figure out which nutritional and lifestyle interventions are most potent for that and put that together in a programmatic way so that people can go, here's what's wrong with my state of immune balance, and here's what I can do through these targeted interventions to bring myself back to a state of closer to equilibrium.
How do people know if they have a healthy metabolism or if they don't, right? Between blood tests, visually looking at themselves, how would you actually know? Because what your point is inside the book is that the worse off your metabolism is, there's a link to anxiety.
That is correct. And going back to the fact that the centers in the brain are linked, there are many different ways. Checking in with your primary care doctor, getting your regular routine checkup, your blood tests. But if you're noticing that you are gaining weight, especially around the midsection, that you are exercising, but you're just not losing weight, maybe you're trying to lose weight, or maybe you're just trying to be healthy, just something that I learned in obesity medicine is never assume that someone who is struggling with their weight is not trying and is not exercising, because there are many other factors which may be impacting them. But with anxiety, it's, the how we eating is directly impacting that. So how do we take a step back, re-examine what we're doing, and rethink what can we do to change this, and can there be a correlation with how we're feeling? Because I think that a lot of what I see in my clinic is that by people not making the connection, they continue to eat and they think they're eating healthy, and actually they are driving inflammation or are worsening their condition, even if their weight is maybe improving. So recognizing that you may be gaining weight at your midsection, you may not be losing the weight if you're really trying hard, that your appetite has changed, that you usually eat a certain meal at home and you feel satiated, and you get up and you maybe take a walk after dinner and you feel fine, but all of a sudden you need twice that amount. That's usually a signal that maybe leptin is impacted or not really reacting, or you have some element of leptin resistance in your body. And what that means is that the body's not listening to leptin. The leptin is the hormone that gives us a signal that we're satiated. So things like that can give you a little bit of a tip off. But if you see your doctor, they will check certain blood tests which will give the medical definition of metabolic syndrome. But I like people to also be able to educate themselves and have signals that they look for in their body. Fatigue is another one of them, just not having energy. Not having energy to do the things that they used to do. And another one is poor sleep.
How much of the idea of calming your mind with food is about eating the right stuff versus avoiding the bad stuff? How would you break down that percentage when you talk about it with your patients?
I'm always about filling the plate than removing foods from the plate, because I tap into the psychology of how people are and the psychology of eating. When people feel deprived and you say to them, don't eat A, B, and C, I used to do this in early days in my clinic as I developed my protocols. It doesn't work. People don't want to feel deprived and they want to go back to eating that food because you've told them not to. So for me, it's about what can we add into this plate, not demonizing, as you mentioned earlier. If you had French fries yesterday, that's okay. Did you have a salad for dinner? Can we build you in a healthier meal today? It's about adding in the foods that are going to be nutritiously relevant. And I want to take that conversation beyond what I did in my first book, which was a general outline of different mental health conditions. And this is your brain on food, the foods to eat, the foods to avoid. Because what we want to do now is understand on a deeper level, what do these foods actually do? How are they interacting with the microbes, and how can they target specific conditions? But the science had to follow. So we know a little bit more, and it's still in evolution.
What are the most exciting things that you want to talk about when it goes to foods or ingredients and the role that they play, especially on this topic of, helping us sort of quiet that anxious part of the brain?
For one thing, when, the way that I understood and read and researched how we digest food and what we eat and how they interact with the gut microbes, they quell inflammation, and they still do that. They help the environment in the gut. They help those microbes, the trillions of microbes that live in the gut, to help with vitamin production. Incredibly important when it comes to conditions like anxiety. Help with hormone production. Women in the stage of menopause may be more anxious. So these microbes are important. They help with sleep, circadian rhythm, our internal body clock. They help with immunity. 70% of the immune system is in the gut. They help with mental health. So they are active. But you might eat spinach and leafy greens, rich in multiple different nutrients, but also folate, vitamin B9. And we know that helps anxiety. But once the folate is broken down with those microbes, it also impacts the neurotransmitters, and which neurotransmitters impact your brain health and impact your anxiety. So if you think about SSRIs, they are used, things like Prozac or Zoloft are used to target symptoms like anxiety. But you can, depending on how severe your anxiety is, really try to eat the foods that can do a similar thing through the mechanism of working with the gut microbiome. Now, take a single thing that people love to eat: dark chocolate. Dark chocolate, especially the extra dark, more natural chocolate, I'm not talking about our traditional candy bars, contain cacao. Cacao is actually the largest plant-based source of non-heme iron. And there's a very large percentage of people in the world, especially women of childbearing age, who are iron deficient. So if you eat chocolate, here's a really cool tip. The cacao is going to help. It's a rich flavanol that will help calm anxiety. It's a probiotic-rich food because of how cacao and the cacao bean are processed. But if you eat it with vitamin C, like from an orange, and you eat a piece of dark chocolate, that helps the absorption of the iron. So it will help you, give your body a nutrient that it actually needs to keep you calmer. So these are just little things that you can do through food. Plus, that's one of my favorite desserts or sweet snacks to have because you're getting it from natural sources.
Do you write about your own story about sort of anxiety and it building up a little bit during the pandemic and other things? Do you want to chat about that for a second?
I would. And my main purpose through was to share with people that anxiety can also come from positive sources. It's not always negative. Sometimes you feel anxious and actually good things are happening and you don't realize it, but you suddenly have this overwhelming level of anxiety. I had my first bout of anxiety I've spoken about before when I had a cancer diagnosis years ago. And that was one of my most powerful lessons in being able to use food to help my treatment and helps really fend off side effects and keep my health stable while I went through chemotherapy. But over the course of writing my first book coming out, it sort of was one of those books that came out in the early pandemic, but then it sort of took off at a certain point. And this was good. This was actually good news and everyone was excited. But I also found myself trying to work faster and harder to keep up with the demand that I needed to put in to make it continue. And I didn't realize the amount of stress that was building up with that. And yet the outcome was all good. The book was selling, people were liking it, I was being invited to more podcasts and more things to share the book. But that I didn't even realize was a driver. And then I had a very positive experience where I was invited to one of the first conferences that went back to being live in the UK. And upon accepting the conference invitation as a keynote speaker in mental health, this was the Personalized Lifestyle and Medicine Conference in 2022, I got an email, which I thought was fake, which wasn't, saying, thank you for accepting this keynote. We'd like you to be one of very few physicians being invited to meet personally with the then His Royal Highness Prince Charles. This was, looking back, was a month before he became king. And of course, no one knew that we were going to lose Queen Elizabeth. So this was, I read this email, I couldn't believe it. Then I thought, no, this is fake. Of course it wasn't. But these are, what goes on in your head. This was a very positive experience for me and for my career and has led to really more wonderful things that have come out of it. I was so unboundedly anxious. I couldn't get myself together. I couldn't think straight. But, I had to work through that and understand through the eyes of my patients that this is a very real feeling. And sometimes when you're experiencing such levels of anxiety, it can be coming from a good source. It may not be something that we always assume it's negative or it's bad. But it doesn't mean that you still need a solution, is what I'm trying to say.
So was there any solution? I think about that moment. It's like, everybody's going to have some, the way you're describing it is like positive anxiety. Do you have these moments in your life where you're feeling nervous, trepidatious towards something that's there? Do you feel like that's something that has to be intervened on, or are there techniques that you brought in that situation to kind of help you with that? And I'm not hearing you say necessarily that's a bad thing. Really what you're talking about inside the book is the chronic anxiety that people face.
The chronic and unremitting anxiety, or the anxiety that we know through medications is not fully treated. We know this from data that about approximately 50% of people take medication and they still remain anxious, and some never go into remission. So we know we need more solutions. For me, these were techniques I actually learned while I was as I was growing up. Yoga and meditation from my grandparents as I was growing up, and they would babysit me when my mom was in medical school. But as I went through medical school later on, I learned breathing techniques, and research has shown that things like pranayama yoga or breathwork yoga can reduce anxiety. So a study done actually looking at heart rate and heart rate variability in 2020 actually showed that just pranayama yoga was lowering anxiety levels. And I just felt that going back to learning a breathwork exercise was a simple thing. Even the power of a deep breath was very important. I feel that things like breathwork, hydration, simply remaining hydrated. I've had patients have severe panic, not realizing they were dehydrated. And having a mindfulness practice that really appeals to you, something that is personal to you and works for you. That's a very big word. It means very many things to different people, as does the word meditation, but something that works for you. For me, it's listening to calming music, having something on my iPhone I can listen to, being able to step outdoors, spend some time in sunlight before I put on my sunblock or sunscreen, because the vitamin D is so important to helping. So there are things that I just try to build into lifestyle choices. And I think that if we have some of that groundwork done, then we're doing a lot of stuff that's going to help us along the way. Food is a big component of that, but it's one of the things that we build in. So I turned to a lot of that initially. I've never taken a medication for anxiety myself, but I do believe that some of my patients have truly needed these medications, so I'm not against them. But I want them to know, and people to know, there are many, many steps we can be taking to actually lay some groundwork. So when that panic or that anxiety is really high, that you have those things you can tap into.
You mentioned panic attacks, and some people who have such severe anxiety struggle with panic attacks. Are you aware at all about some of the dialogue and conversation around sort of how a massive drop in blood sugar that comes from sort of a massive spike in blood sugar can induce panic attacks in some people?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I've actually seen that. A patient that I treated pre-pandemic experienced that, not realizing while training for a marathon, she was being encouraged before she came to see me, she was being encouraged by a nutritionist to eat a certain way to help her training for the marathon. I thought retrospectively some of that information should have been tweaked for her, because what was happening is she was an otherwise healthy eater, but she was having a very high, and this was specific to her body, not saying all marathon runners will experience this, but for her, whatever diet she was eating was raising her blood sugar, and it was falling precipitously. So that sort of sugar crash that people experience when they eat things like donuts or, sort of a very sweet breakfast, for example. And what was happening is she was actually reaching hypoglycemia and feeling very, very anxious and almost panicked. So these again are simple things that we can resolve if we are paying attention to a more healthy diet than not. I'm a big proponent of people enjoying life. And if eating a piece of birthday cake is what a person wants to do on their birthday, I'm not against that. I feel like there's a lot of joy in how people eat, but it's about, going back to that plate for the most times, the most number of days of that week, filling that plate with the healthier foods than the packaged processed foods and the fast foods and junk foods, and really being aware of things like sugar and where we're getting our sugar from.
Yeah, I think that awareness piece is a big part, because a lot of people don't realize that many of the foods that they're being marketed as healthy, like down the street from this studio here in Los Angeles, and you can see them all over LA. There's like an acai bowl place.
Yes.
And acai as a fruit is incredible.
Yes. And
it has tons of phytonutrients, antioxidants, all these different things that are there. The acai bowl places, typically it's like more sugar than 2 Coca-Colas. Right?
I'm so glad you
said that. The bananas,
the
sweetened acai that's there, then people drizzle honey on top, then they add a bunch of other things.
Yes.
It can be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 grams of carbs, depending on how somebody prepares it. Correct. Especially when they start to add in, granola and other things. They think, wow, this is like a very healthy way to start the day, especially breakfast.
Right.
And because most people have never tracked their blood sugar, they don't see that they have this big spike and they go down. But generally, most people, in fact, if you experience being hangry in the day, that's also a version of your blood sugar dropping.
Yes, it is.
Not that that's an immediate situation that you're somebody who's unhealthy, but there
Right.
is blood sugar dysregulation that you're experiencing when you get hangry.
You are so correct. I want to go back to that the fruit bowl, acai bowl, because I actually wrote about this recently, and also one of the places that I've seen people go in to get this breakfast bowl, right? And I've actually looked at multiple times, and I keep thinking a few things. One, there's about 4 servings in the one bowl that you are buying to eat yourself, right? Because if you think about it, the amount of each ingredient is high. The acai on its own is great. If you have blueberries in there on their own, they're great, a little quarter cup. But when you put them all together and you add the different layers, the granola has added honey, then you're adding drizzling honey on top of that. So people don't realize these are actually sugar bombs. And they are not necessarily the healthiest way to consume those foods. And in consuming those individual ingredients is very different. They completely they wreak havoc with your blood sugar when you eat them that way. And I think that so many things. Another one is fruited yogurts. We've talked about this before. A half cup with blueberries in it is very different from if you consume dairy. A half cup of plain yogurt with a little quarter cup of blueberries and some cinnamon, which actually helps the blood sugar, is totally different from a fruited yogurt, which can have up to 6 teaspoons of sugar in it because of the added sugars. So very, very different products, and causing such sways to your blood sugars that you can actually feel super anxious on account of that.
Yeah, I was just looking it up for French fries. For a large serving of French fries, it's 64 grams of carbohydrates. And those carbohydrates turn into sugars in our body. We're not here to demonize carbs, but when you eat that by itself, right? Especially people often eat their French fries first before they even eat,
before they eat,
their burger or their burrito, or whatever
true.
else they're getting along with it. That has an immediate, separate from the acrylamide,
yes,
which has some potentially toxic aspects of it in high dosages and concentrated. That in itself is this rush of sugar, which is over a period of time, day after day, is going to wreak havoc on your metabolism.
It is going to wreak havoc. And something that there's some very interesting data on this. Again, I'm not demonizing sugar. We need natural sugars for our bodies to work. And we're not demonizing carbs either. But carbs also exist in healthy cruciferous vegetables. But 4 grams, if you're looking at a food label, another thing that often tricks us is our recipes in the United States are in pounds and ounces, but our food labels are in grams. So 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. And that's an easy conversion just to use when you're shopping online or you're in the supermarket. By understanding that, now it wouldn't directly convert from 64 grams of carbs, but if you think about it, you're somewhere in a very high range. But if you're just looking at sugar or added sugars on a food label, that's an easy conversion. And that's how you can know in a half cup of yogurt that you're getting up to 6 teaspoons of sugar. And I think just understanding that despite the labels of healthy, natural, organic, whatever the label says, actually look at the ingredients, because that's empowering yourself in your own mental health dialogue to know that you're not consuming too much of the wrong ingredients.
Well, one of the big things you talk about in the book is that it's, as you mentioned, sugar has its challenges in these concentrated forms, largely because it's removed from dietary fiber. So do you want to talk a little bit about dietary fiber and how that plays into this whole thing?
So dietary fiber, there's been an emergence of really good books and data and research over the last few years, understanding fiber a little bit better. As I say, fiber used to be what we thought our grandmothers drank in little orange drinks because, maybe she's having a problem going to the bathroom. Fiber is much more serious than that. It is an ingredient in food that we really need. We definitely need protein, but Americans tend to focus on counting protein grams and ignore fiber. So we are eating much less fiber than we should. You get fiber from plant foods, from beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains. I guide people to whole grains versus, the processed, ultra-processed grains. So I think that having some of that in your diet is important, not the whole thing. Fiber is the main nutrient for the gut microbes. So the gut microbes, the trillions of them that live there, really look to fiber to nurture them. So by taking care of those gut microbes, you are taking care of your physical health, all of the functions of those microbes that we talked about earlier, plus your mental health. Fiber is also satiating. So I always say fiber is your friend when you're anxious. Why? Because a fiber-filled food would break down more slowly in your body, would not cause that blood sugar spike, would metabolize more slowly in your body, and you would feel full. It's not feeling hungry after you've eaten a donut 20 minutes later and wanting a second and third donut. And think about if you've ever had that experience when you have a more satiating meal. So fiber is a very powerful ingredient that I think we kind of need to be paying more attention to, just by including, and a simple, easy way to do it is building up your salad bowl. Not the acai fruit bowl, but the salad bowl with your different colors of vegetables, the different, beans, nuts, seeds, all sorts of things, your clean proteins, whether that's chicken or beef, whatever it is that you prefer, to really add to your fiber.
You mentioned leptin before. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? We've talked about a bunch on this podcast, on previous podcasts,
right.
But can you talk about leptin, metabolism, anxiety, the relationship between all those things?
Yes. So, leptin is very simply the hormone that tells us that we're full, in simplest terms. And when you develop, if you've been eating poorly, stressed, multiple different things, and if you've developed leptin resistance, which basically means your body, the cells in your body are not really recognizing or responding to the leptin signal, you develop something called leptin resistance. So you eat that first plate of food and you're starving and you feel like, I barely ate anything, I need more. And you go for a second or third helping. This is usually a signal that there's something that's off with your metabolism. But remember, we talked about how the brain interacts with different parts of the body and metabolism, including the immune system, the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, as well as the endocrine system. So by interacting with systems, we know that the brain is that firstly, we know that mental health is no longer just an above the neck concept, but we also know the brain is relating to the body around metabolism. And then the way that it's connected back to the brain is that anxiety mostly is understood through the amygdala and the hippocampus. So there's a connection there. Leptin resistance means that our body is not responding to the right metabolic signals. We're eating more. We're impacting our metabolism. Not everyone will develop metabolic syndrome, but we may become one of those 88% of the country that we think are metabolically unhealthy, and that then will certainly impact in a good number of people the level of anxiety you feel.
You mentioned the hippocampus. We recently had a gentleman named Dr. Majid Fotuhi on the podcast, and he is known for a lot of his research in tracking and his research over like 30 years about tracking like the size of the hippocampus and different things that shrink the hippocampus over time. And separate from the topic of food, and he did note that a high sugar diet is something that shrinks the hippocampus, is people not being active or living a sedentary lifestyle. Yeah. So where does that play into the conversation of anxiety?
I'm really glad you asked that, because another thing that I walk people through in the protocol in my book is that it's not just one thing. So it's not just food. Food is the focus of my work and my research, but I also have sincerely believed for a very long time that medicine needed a holistic and integrated approach. And so in my clinic, I started asking people what they were doing for exercise and taking it out of the 10-minute model of a medication check to, what else are you doing? Are you spending time outdoors? Are you engaging in forest bathing, which is basically spending time in nature, spending time outdoors? All of these things positively impact mental health. So when it comes to this specifically, I feel that including more solutions for people beyond just medications and psychotherapy becomes critical for anxiety, and having a protocol that they can follow and build in things that they enjoy. Exercise is critical. We know we need a certain number of, technically by definition, a certain number of minutes of exercise a week. What I ask people to do is find things that they like to do. Maybe if they're severely anxious and not feeling great with their mood, all they can do is walk. Maybe they start there, but they build it up in a certain way. We know that we want them to be building up their protein and their muscle. So that's another part of the protocol. It becomes almost a system that is very personalized for the individual based on their goals, their level of anxiety, their metabolism, their metabolic health overall. But exercise is a huge part of it. And just being able to, I've had a lot of patients tell me that they exercise to kind of release that angst that they're feeling. And that is actually true because endorphins get released. We feel better when we exercise. So for some people with anxiety, they will get on a treadmill and do 20 minutes on the treadmill to expend some energy, and they feel a lot calmer after that. For others, they're so anxious they can't get on the treadmill. So I might ask them to walk. Can they engage in a class that they like at the gym? Maybe it's a Zumba class. Maybe it's a high intensity class. Whatever it is that appeals to them is usually the way to go. Because not everyone just takes naturally to exercise, but it's an important part of an anti-anxiety protocol to integrate something you enjoy doing and build up, just like you're reformatting your plate, to build up on more and more of what you enjoy doing so that you're keeping healthy.
Yeah, you mentioned that not everybody takes naturally to exercise. Would you also say, though, if somebody's struggling with anxiety, if they don't fix their sedentary lifestyle, it's likely that it's not going to improve?
This is a tough one. I think that
it's kind of like asking, well, I don't want to cut you off, so please.
No,
go ahead.
please.
Genuinely, I want to hear your thoughts. And sort of the second part of that question would be, if somebody's struggling with anxiety, but they're eating ultra-processed foods, is there any chance that they would ever get better? So let's start first with the exercise one, because I cut you off, and I apologize about that.
No worries at all. That is such a great question. So I'll tell you that I feel people should exercise because it's so critical to things like our cardiac health. And people forget, I'm here talking about anxiety today, but the number one killer in the United States is cardiac disease. So we know that keeping an active lifestyle and a non-sedentary lifestyle is going to help your cardiac health. So I cannot sit here as a physician trying to be responsible about everyone's health and say you can avoid exercise and kind of sit on the couch and do what you want and eat a healthy diet but sit on the couch. So I've heard Dr. Mark Hyman say this, you can't exercise out of a bad diet, and I completely agree with that. And I've said that to all of my patients. So you can't eat the ultra-processed food and do 200 minutes of exercise a week and say, I'm fine. And it also has nothing to do with your weight, by the way, because you can be very slender and slim, but you can have visceral fat, which we're not seeing from the outside of looking at your body, which may be impacting your metabolic health. So it's really, it's a much more complex discussion, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I feel like you also can't outrun the processed, ultra-processed food. So if you're eating junk food, that's what's feeding your body and your brain. That's what's feeding those gut microbes. That's what's driving the inflammation inside of your body. And again, you may still be slim and slender, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be feeling physically healthy in the long term, or that your mental health is going to benefit. So yes, to exercise. What I have to do in mental health is, if a person is so severely anxious and maybe has an impacted mood as well, because often those two conditions go together, maybe they can't get out of bed. What do they need first to get them going? Can they start with walking to get coffee? Can they walk to get the newspaper? Can they take the dog out on a walk? Can they get their bodies moving? So you're trying to change that mindset of, I'm feeling depressed and anxious, I'm going to watch television the whole day. I'm going to sit in front of the computer. So those things are hugely important. And I don't think we can really get away from understanding those things now. So yeah, very long answer to a short question, but yeah, we got to exercise, but find what works for you.
And patient testimonials from, putting people on protocols, like the protocol in your book that you want to share?
Yes. One of the patients that I remember, because I wouldn't have really initially linked this until I started to uncover what I talk about in the book, which is sort of the impact of immunity and the immune system, which is 70% of the immune system is actually in the gut. A young woman who came in with a rash on her skin, and you're probably thinking, well, why is she coming to see you? Well, her dermatologist had referred her And she came in because she was feeling super anxious. And it turned out, with a little more investigation, that she had a condition called SLE. And the condition actually shows up with rashes that are very specific, kind of a textbook diagnosis you learn in medical school. But I also uncovered that she really needed help with her diet, and the impact of the immune system, her dietary needs, and anxiety were all linked. And what I liked the most about it was, and why I seem to remember her, was that I had not really thought that these systems were connected. I might have come across a study, I might have read something, but I didn't see that immediate connection until I worked with her. And that really uncovered why I wrote about immunity as part of this book. In the past, I've had individuals who had made changes to their diet, and it wasn't immediately linked, say, to the immune system, but made changes in their diet through a work promotion and things like that, and had developed inflammation and gut dysbiosis, and diet can also help there. But here it was very specific to healing across the systems.
Yeah. So what were some of the things you had her do?
Some of the things I had her do were, firstly, we cleaned up her diet. We worked collaboratively with her dermatologist. There were some things that she did need to do. We improved, some of the recipes that I wrote in the book are recipes that I gave to patients to try out, basically using high-impacting, anxiety-ridden foods, a protocol, a shopping list that really carved out for her the food she needed to buy and cook for herself. And also really teaching her other things like a mindfulness practice, asking her to find a breathing technique that worked for her, having her learn that. So these also sort of calmed down her system in a way that helped her through this episode. It was very encouraging.
One of the things that you write about inside of the book, we talked a little about sugar, we talked about carbs, we talked about fiber, is you talk a little about protein. And because so much of metabolic health is maintaining, good blood sugar and not finding yourself in a place where you're completely hangry during the day, what are your thoughts about that? It seems to be, through multiple studies and people talking about satiety, that protein is one of the most satiating things that people can be eating inside of their diet. I know obviously people can get their protein sources from multiple things. And even though you're vegetarian, you celebrate people eating all sorts of different types of healthy diets.
I do.
It feels like for a long time, though, there wasn't enough education with a lot of patients that they were starting their mornings off with foods that were either very high in carbs or often very high in fat. But both of those foods are typically not as connected with satiety as much as like a high protein breakfast would be. Any thoughts on that?
So that's such a great question, and I'll tell you from my own personal experience, two things. I think there's a lot more research now, and a lot more great doctors and authors and clinicians talking about, what foods to eat in what order, what foods are most satiating. But I actually agree, through my own experience, that protein is extremely helpful for satiating ourselves. It's important for our metabolic health. It's what you pair it with, but it's also starting your day in a certain way. Why? Because as a vegetarian, it has been a struggle throughout my life to figure out how to get enough protein. And over the course of writing this book, I actually figured out a way to create a smoothie that is entirely plant-based. That is something I've built into my diet. And I don't feel good if I don't have it anymore. I only add water to it, and I've found a protein powder, which is one of the bases. And it has changed not feeling hangry in the middle of doing a podcast, not feeling hangry in the middle of working, because I knew there was a gap. And I thought I was, cooking enough food and eating enough of these vegetables and those proteins to make up, but there was still a deficit. And I found that because I didn't have enough energy for the training that I was doing. And I'm not training for a marathon or something. I'm just trying to get my exercise routine right. And realized that it was kind of, my trainer basically said, I think you need to be eating more protein. I respect that you're vegetarian, but I'm calculating what you're saying, and I know you know this, but maybe it's not enough. But sometimes someone highlighting that to you, because I wasn't feeling hungry, but I also wasn't getting enough protein. So really, this journey of this book has taught me a lot. And one of them is, for myself, I really needed to put that smoothie into my day several times a week. I don't always have it. I can't always have it when I'm traveling, but putting that enough times in my week that I'm getting that protein source.
What are some other things that you found that have been helpful for people, like that you feel like is not really being talked about when it comes to the topic of anxiety? Anything that we haven't touched on?
I think we've done I think we've covered a lot of stuff, but I feel like my biggest message is that this is a more complex topic, and that it's not always negative, and that there are solutions for people, because I think everyone is feeling a little anxious these days, and that's what I'm noticing. And really, it was inspired by a lot of the last few years and what I've seen the most of.
Do you want to chat at all about, do you practice any sort of media boundaries, media fasting, any way that you consume media, whether it be TV, social media, news of any sort?
I decided at a certain point that during the pandemic that I needed to understand as a physician what the data was, but I could not have access to the news 24/7 because it really was just impacting my work during the pandemic, which I had to do as a hospital-based doctor, and that it wasn't helping me. So I would consume the important tidbits that I needed to know. We had broadcasts throughout the hospital during the pandemic. And I would listen to those because they gave us the data, told us what was going on inside of our hospital and in the world. That was very helpful for me. In terms of social media, because I am an author and I share my work through a mental health platform on social media, I consume some of that, but I'm not. My biggest role in social media is really creating content, which I can honestly do without being on social media. I write a lot of content all the time. I care deeply about accepting media inquiries because it's an opportunity for me to share appropriate information that's well vetted. I don't assume that I'm always right. I'm sure that I'm not, in fact, but I always answer media queries from reporters because I want people to have well vetted information. So not huge on reading media all the time. I try to keep up with the research. And I consume it in a way that I can tolerate, and I, watch things for fun when I have downtime.
Yeah. Do you ever tell patients that they should just take a break from the news and turn the news off?
When they have anxiety, very often I give them guidelines around, listen, do you need to be, because some people will come in and say, I'm watching the, current whatever the situation is on the news, and I'm really very upset about it. And sometimes, around politics, this happened a lot. And I would actually say to them, look, I understand you feel strongly about this, but this is not helping your mental health. You are consuming every bit of information about either a political figure or about an incident. It's not that it's not serious, it's not of value to you, but taking a break from this is actually going to help calm you down, because it's just driving your system in a way that you are in overdrive mentally all of the time and super anxious.
Is there a food that you personally started eating more of in the research of this book? And is there a food that you started eating less of in the research of this book?
So I started to, it's a funny thing. In culinary school, we did multiple different recipes, and we were taught to pair chocolate with citrus, so orange with dark chocolate. But it blew my mind when I found out that the extra dark natural chocolate and pairing it with citrus will actually help the absorption of iron. So to me, I started eating more extra dark chocolate. And one of my favorite fruits is like little clementines, is something that in the citrus family, because I enjoy that combination. For me, it's almost like a dessert. So definitely yes to that. And less of, I would say, I really leaned into learning and recipes on the air fryer, in the air fryer, and making things that were crispy that I otherwise may occasionally cook at home, but really leaning into what can I do more of in a healthy way, with virtually no oil or touch of avocado oil in an air fryer to still make something tasty.
Hey YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
I feel like the science is there. We have the science. We have the evidence. It's just that we have to